Welcome back to the second segment of this hour of Love Babs, Love Talk on WNHH FM Community Radio. I'm Paul Bass, filling in for the great Babs Rawls-Ivy as she recovers with our prayers and best wishes from hip surgery. And this segment, we're going to have a guest I love having on WNHH FM. He's so much fun to talk to him, so interesting. Gives me a lot of hope about the next generation, he said paternalistically, something twice his age. Say good morning to Joshua Van Hoesen. Joshua, welcome back to WNHH FM.
Morning, Van Hoesen, close enough.
Oh, Van Hoesen. Okay, sorry about that.
No, that's fine.
Like Hoosier.
My principal pronounced it wrong when my brother graduated, so
that's a big deal.
That was a big deal.
What did you guys do when he pronounced it wrong?
Rolled our eyes.
Oh, that's deadly. You showed them.
Yep.
Well, just so our listeners know, Josh does a lot. Josh works for, I guess, a software company, right? You develop software.
Yep.
He's kind of one of those tech smart guys, which is why he has a very good lighting right now on his video for this. Josh is a leader of the community management team, right? Westville, West Hills.
That is
helped bring that. When this pandemic hit, they were one of the first that really involved people in a serious way through Zoom because he knew what he was doing. And he moved just a couple of years ago to Upper Westville from the East Shore. How's the water in your basement? I remember you had a lot of leaks.
So it's a little bit better. I worked on drainage around my house a little bit last year. I do still have some more work. I have to put in window wells, which were not on the property. Which will help out even more, but it's getting better, little steps.
And was it because there's that little stream nobody knows about in Upper Westville that goes under all those properties that used to be exposed years ago, or am I getting that wrong?
So I'm not quite sure, in all honesty. I just know that when it rains a lot, or we've got heavy snows and then it melts, I will start to get water around the edges. Mm-hmm. And, depending on how much, it will make its way to the center.
Well, you're a homeowner who's thinking about issues that don't always fit into our national daily drama arguments of liberal versus conservative, left versus right. You're worried about what it's like to own a home in Westville. And to that end, you were running for a seat on the New Haven Board of Alders from Ward 26. You're a Republican. You've run several times now, and they say it's important in politics to get out there and run a bunch of times when you're new, and then one day you win. And in the process, you still raise good issues and get people involved in politics. Why are you running for that luxury of spending endless nights at long hearings for what's really just a stipend?
So honestly, it's not even so much. Well, obviously, it's not about the stipend.
I think it's $2,000 for about 2,000 hours.
Yeah, it's not quite. Though I because I put in a lot of time anyways to the community without any sort of stipend, so that's not really a concern of mine. No, so a lot of it boils down to the long-term issues that the city faces, and a lot of it revolves around our finances and the long-term sustainability of the city. As I'm sure you know, I'm a very small-time landlord in New Haven, so I have one investment property. I try as much as I can to keep that place affordable, which is hard when we have tax increases or proposed tax increases of 7.4% or 23% or, these kind of very large amounts. And I hate to raise rent year after year after year, especially when I know that my tenants aren't making more money year after year after year. So I would very much like to see New Haven get on a sustainable path, and we're just not there.
So what that's the $1 million question, right? Or is it the $590 million question, depending which operating budget we pass this year?
Yeah,
which
right.
Is that what do we do? 60% of our property is non-taxable because Yale and New Haven others own it.
Yep.
But because of the vagaries of Connecticut law, we have to rely heavily on the property tax. That's how we get our money, right?
Yeah, so, and it's
Joshua Van Hoesen buys a property in Bethany, he's going to pay a lot less tax than he buys the same property in New Haven.
Yeah.
So we've cut a lot of government to the bone over the decades. We can argue about how much more, and a lot of our stuff is funded outside anyway that people like to cut, like administrative jobs in the Board of Ed. I really haven't seen anyone come up with the answer, Josh, which is why I'm glad you're running, to how do we get things sustainable? Do we have to decide now? There are things government's always done, and we're just not going to do anymore because we just can't raise the money, even though as human beings who care about each other, we want to? Or is there some way we can bring in other money we thought we couldn't get? Or am I wrong? Is there this fat, everybody says there's so much in government, but never comes up with like three people they can cut that would add up to 0.0001% of the budget?
So for some of this, it's not necessarily fat. It's and I'll speak a little on our fixed costs. So our biggest cost that the city faces is our union agreements. And don't get me wrong, I believe everyone should be paid fairly. I believe we all deserve benefits for the work that we have done. A lot of the promises that the city has made in the past are just not sustainable. Some of the promises that we continue to make for the future are not sustainable. And eventually we're going to hit a wall, and those people that we have promised money and benefits to, down the line, city government's just going to go, well, we can't pay it. And everyone's going to be out. And I never want us to hit that point. So we have to start now looking at one, do we recover from the promises that we've already made that we can't support? And how do we make sure that the promises that we make in the future, we can support? So one of the avenues that I've looked at, the state actually has a municipal solvency fund that the city could potentially tap into.
You talk about MARB, Municipal Accountability Review Board? They come take over your finances, they bail you out, and then you, in agreement, they undo your union agreements?
No, I would not necessarily want to do that. So a lot of the avenues that individuals have proposed is, yes, either the MARB or bankruptcy. Both of those are difficult propositions and have some very negative potential consequences. So with both of those, well, I guess any sort of these solutions, we have to get approval from the state, because even though New Haven was here technically first, we are a subsidiary of the state. So according to state law, they could actually literally come in here and go, yeah, New Haven doesn't exist anymore. And that's kind of that. I mean, it's more complex than that, but we are limited highly based on state law. What the state does have is this municipal solvency fund that can be set up where cities, instead of bonding out themselves for whatever high rate that they can get, would actually do it through the state and potentially at a lower rate. So then we could cover these promises that we've already made, because our pensions are not fully funded by any stretch of the imagination, very, very low amount. And our actuarial returns that we are assuming, even now, we adjusted them this year down some, but they're still high.
Well, we've been saying for years that we would get 7.75% back on our pensions whenever it was a year, I believe, get more than 7, which always makes my wife and me stop and say, wait, you can really get 7% return? That's not shabby. But in any case, this year, the Ellick administration said we want to do this seriously, so we're going to start paying more. We can't get all the way there. So I believe, if I'm not wrong, Josh, he's saying 7.25%, which I believe means even to get there, which doesn't fully fund it, to your point, that's still another $20 million, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
I mean, like, how do you find that without raising Josh's taxes?
Well, and that's the thing, and I think it's difficult. I cannot necessarily promise that taxes are not going to go up. We don't want them going up by 7-8%. I think what's very important to people is they understand what's coming year after year after year. If I can budget that I'm going to have to pay another $50 on property taxes next year, I can budget. I can work with my numbers over the course of the year and figure that out and get that done. If all of a sudden I'm paying an extra $500 a year because we've raised taxes and done reassessment in the same year because we decide not to do anything for the past 2, leaves me in a very difficult position to figure out where that money is necessarily coming from.
So long-term planning.
Yeah, long-term planning.
So, so if I'm hearing you correctly, and I wasn't aware of this municipal solvency fund, you're saying we get a better interest rate borrowing. One problem we've gotten into that makes today tougher is, in the past, we've done some borrowing called scoop and toss. Every time a mayor runs for office, it's all the mayors, by the way. There's no good or bad mayor here. They feel they want to get reelected. They don't want to raise taxes that year, so they borrow and use it for operating funds, meaning not for paying debts or building roads or schools or bridges. but to pay the bills year after year, which is considered a road to bankruptcy, which how Hartford got there. And you get a lot of money up front, 30 million a year. Last time we did scoop and toss, but then it's more later. Are you suggesting something similar by borrowing our way out of this?
No. So I definitely don't want to be doing like scoop and toss and then not funding things. So the point of the scoop and the point of the solvency is to get us to the point where we should be at a lower rate than if we had to increase our payments offhand because we've been underfunding this for years and years and years. Mm-hmm. So essentially we can go, well, the state is promising, because it's the state, it's not necessarily like private organizations or lending institutes going, the state is going to promise this, we have to put in as much as X amount now that we're at our position, so we're not having to raise the rates that we're paying in year after year after year.
So it's called the difference between the 7% returns we should be counting on as opposed to the 7.7 we've been claiming would come in and never did?
Yeah, correct.
So what do we, and it sounds to me like you have a part two. So part one is you go to this fund to make up for the promises many mayors made over the years for benefits. And to be fair, also at times we thought the only way to keep cops to compete with other communities was to let them retire after 20 years and have a whole second career and get decades more of pensions. And there was a fire department. Mayor DeStefano was running for governor and struck a deal with that union that we're still paying for.
Yeah.
But also people are living longer, Josh, right? So it used to be you got a pension at 65 and the actuaries said most of you are going to die at 67. So it's a couple of years and maybe you're widow or widower. Now you can retire 45, 49, get your pension. You might get it till you're 80. And that's part of why we might be broke, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So part one is you're saying get money up front to pay the back end.
Yep.
What are you thinking about going forward to, would you renegotiate? Can you renegotiate these union contracts?
I mean, we can and we can't. So I think when we negotiate anytime going forward, we should seriously consider looking at going towards defined contributions instead of defined benefits.
401k?
Yeah, correct. Or something along those lines. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. One, it's going to let us more accurately judge our costs because our costs are going to be happening then. They're not going to be happening down the line, so to speak. The other side of that is, and I'm going to skip a little bit over into some accountability sections. Mm-hmm. So I know we've been talking about police accountability for past couple of years. One of the big things, and I know police departments are very nervous about this, that something could happen and they could lose their pension, and all this work is now out of the water.
Oh, the bad boy clause.
Right, exactly. With a defined contribution, if you're gone, it doesn't matter whether you bad terms, good terms, we're no longer contributing because we contributed while you were here. Mm-hmm. So then there's none of this, well, I have to protect myself to protect this pension forever. It's okay, we're done with you. You can now find another job.
What's the other side? Why don't unions want defined contribution as opposed to defined benefit?
Well, I think, and I can't talk on the individual levels. I think defined benefits historically have given a little bit more than defined contributions.
But you're at the mercy of the market with defined contribution, whereas defined benefits, you're going to get a certain amount of money. With defined contribution, we're promising we're going to give you the money up front, but if the market tanks, you're sunk, right?
Yep. And as we've seen, municipalities are very optimistic about how much money that they are going to be making.
One thing is that the rest of society has moved to 401ks. That has not necessarily been good for the worker, right? It's been expensive to stick with the old-fashioned way of pensions, but it does mean people aren't going to be eating cat food when they're 80.
Well, I don't think anyone should be eating cat food when they're 80. Right. And honestly, as a nation, we need to have a very tough conversation about, what our social safety nets are supposed to be looking like, the rate that individuals get paid in the private workforce and then are able to contribute to their savings and their retirement to live on later in life without having to work. But that's a whole nother conversation unto itself.
Joshua Van Hoesen, I love Babs, love talk, running for Alder Ward 26. He's a Republican. Why are you a Republican?
So I'm a Republican because I like small government. I mean, that's a big one. A lot of the times I think that government has a fairly decent job at directing and organizing, but not necessarily providing services in the most equitable or efficient manner. One thing that's a little frustrating from my perspective is, and we saw this with the maintenance with the school systems. So maintenance has not been what our expectations are.
No, you don't clean a filter for years and years, and suddenly the kids are breathing in dirt, and you don't service the HVAC system, and they're freezing at Wexler Grant. Yeah.
Right. And so a lot of individuals' response to that was, oh, well, we should bring this in-house. Well, if government had been doing proper oversight to begin with, this wouldn't have been necessarily an issue. So if you don't have oversight when you're actually putting the work out, why do you expect to have better oversight once you bring the work in?
Okay, I don't want to go deep into this. This is where you and I see it differently. We agree there was an oversight, but when there's a public good and you're using public money, if you're relying on the public sector, the private sector to do it, they're not necessarily have the incentive to do better. Because in fact, we're relying on the private sector here. Wouldn't the answer to be improve the oversight rather than say it's because government can't do
well, yeah, I think government should improve the oversight in that regard. And then if they're not living up to what we are paying them to do, they need to be fired. Gotcha. I mean, that's it.
What else on Republican? Like, what makes you a Republican?
Oh, goodness. I mean, I honestly, a lot of that is the small town government stuff, a lot of the fiscal responsibility of, I don't necessarily believe the government's the best place to be doing this. I'm not libertarian because I do believe there is a place for government. You know, the private sector cannot handle everything because people I'm not gonna say people are inherently greedy, but a lot of companies and businesses do not necessarily look at the grander scheme. They look at what's the best for them, because that's what the private sector is. They're trying to make a profit, which is understandable. Through that profit, they're hopefully increasing efficiency.
What about other local, quickly, Harry tells me of just a couple minutes left. What other ways would a Republican approach, a Josh Van approach, affect education, immigration, anything else we're doing in town? You've talked a lot about
not necessarily. And even in regards to the education stuff, there's, the Board of Alders is restricted because we're not the ones who necessarily determine how the Board of Education spends their budget. They just come forward to us and go, this is the budget that we want. This is what we're using for, yes or no. And we can.
So how does it fit into the arguments going nationally at the Republican Party? Are you involved with the state and national party? Are you happy with the direction party? Every party, Democrats, Republicans, have splits of wings. Where do you fit on your party split?
So I actually stepped back from my involvement in both State Central and the RTC because I felt I was spending a lot of mental effort thinking about problems that I could not necessarily address, especially at this point. So I stepped back from all of those. I went, okay, how can I be more involved in my local community? How can I help the city of New Haven? How can I focus my mental energy on something that's actually productive for me?
But were you a member of State Central Committee and the Republican Town Committee?
I was. Yep.
And you resigned from both?
I did.
Was it because of January 6th or?
So in regard, no. So I no one liked January 6th. I can say that offhand. Local RTC didn't like it. People in State Central didn't like it. It was abomination. I literally wept. That has been one of the saddest days in my life in a very long time. It was incredibly difficult for me. I care very much for the structure of our nation, so to speak, and us being able to move forward and, progress from administration to administration, from individual to individual. I am what's known as an unhappy politician. I don't like a lot of policy on both sides, but I recognize with the structure that we have, we're able to have those conversations and move forward. The 6th flew in the face of all of that.
Did you have a deeper alienation with the national movement of the party under Trump?
I think it was frustrating for me, but again, I'm trying to focus on New Haven. I can't really affect much of that, as I hope everyone who's listening, write your local representatives who represent you at the state and the federal level.
So is
You
it
know,
fair to sum up to say that you are a true Republican? You believe in Republican principles, fiscal responsibility, not everything being the public sector,
yep,
and that you felt the best way to pursue that is at the very local level. That you
correct.
can run as a true Republican, feel good about being a Republican, give New Haven a choice, and that's what you're trying to do running for Ward 26 Alder as a Republican, right?
Correct. Yep, yep.
Well, the election's not for a while, so we're running out of time now. Will you promise to come back so we could talk to you at more length about other issues? We ended up talking a lot because I was so interested in what you're saying about pensions. There's a lot more to talk about.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, anytime. Just give me a shout, and I'd be more than happy to come back on.
All right, Joshua Van Hoesen, thanks for coming on. Love Babs, love talk. And thanks everyone for joining us today. As I said, I'm Paul Bass. I'm filling in for the great Babs Rawls Ivy this week on the second hour most of the days as she's recovering from hip surgery. We wish her the best. We love her. Send all our prayers her way. I think she's going to be on the mend soon and back in the slot, keeping the good vibes flowing and the conversation going. And Harry Droz, our station manager behind the controls. Thanks for doing a great job with the show. And thank you to Josh. Love when you come on the radio. Hope you'll come back many times in the future.
Of course,
We're,
good to be here.
we're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass filling in for Babs Rawls Ivy until tomorrow on WNHHFM, New Haven's home